Hi, and welcome to another episode of pianoTV. So today's Q&A is a very kind of like complicated subject to talk about, and that is how to speed up a piece. So what I find happens with people is they tend to fall on like one side of the spectrum. So the first side of the spectrum is that they're kind of like stuck in this slow playing limbo, and they can play slowly very easily, but like it's really difficult to speed up. And then on the other side are the people who can play really fast. Their fingers move fast, but their fast playing loses a lot of like clarity and definition. So I wanted to address this problem today in two parts. So the first part is figuring out if there's any comprehension problems. And the second part is figuring out sort of like practical solutions that you can try. So my hope for this video is that you can take even just one thing away from it and try it like immediately. Like right after this video, like you can go to the piano and 10 or 15 minutes later you can be like, gosh darn, I learned something. All right, so part one is comprehension. This is kind of like you need to make sure your bases are covered here before you go to the next part. You need to be able to understand your song, like know it inside out before you can implement strategies to speed it up. So I'm gonna break this part down too because I'm like a bullet points kind of person. So part one of comprehension is how well do you know the piece? Do you know it really well to the point where the sheet music is just sort of a guide? Or are you kind of like reading note by note as you play it? Because that's going to be hugely important, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Number two is how well do you know the keyboard? Do you find yourself looking down at your fingers a lot and being like, where's G? There's G. And number three, are you making logical finger choices that are the exact same every time you do it? So first of all, you got to learn the piece well. This is kind of just like common knowledge. You can't really play a song fast if you don't know it that well. So like I mentioned, if you feel like you're sight reading a piece and you're not just using the sheet music as a general guideline, then you probably don't know it well enough to play it fast. I mean, even if you've been playing for 3 months, let alone like 3 years, 3 decades, or whatever it is, you probably know the difference between a song you're still sort of sight reading through versus a song that you can just kind of like use the music as a guide. And like, yeah, not just like religiously following every single note. Because if you think about it, the time it takes you to read like A, B, C, D is like you can play all 4 of those notes faster than you can even think of them one at a time. Like you can go bleh instead of A. Instead of going A, B, C, D. Number two, you have to know your keyboard. So when I teach students, even like pretty much right from the beginning, I make sure that they're kind of jumping around the keyboard and they're not just like locking in one hand position for all of their songs. Actually, as a side note, this is why I like using the Piano Adventures method books for both kids and adults, because the songs get you out of just one hand position. They make you move around a bit. And knowing your keyboard geography, as an old piano teacher of mine once said, keyboard geography is so cute, but knowing it is so crucial. So if you're at the point where you're like, if this is C, then oh, there's F, then you probably don't know the keyboard well enough to play a song fast. You need to just know, like, oh, that's an F, that's an A, without thought. Like, it should just be instinctual. It shouldn't be a thought process. So if you're not there yet, that's something you can work on. So one way you can see if you're like at this point is, can you play your piece without looking at your hands? Can you like either keep your eyes on your music, or can you play with your eyes closed or blindfolded? When as a kid, my mom used to say like I should practice blindfolded sometimes, and I probably thought she was crazy at the time, but like there's really something to that. It's not something you need to do all the time, but it gives you a good indication on how secure you are with where your notes are. Do you have to look at your hands to see where, say, like a G is, or do you just like know? Does your finger just feel its way there? That's crucial. So number three is making sure that you're using logical, smart finger choices. So if the finger markings are written down in your book, that's awesome. Follow them. If you want to change something, that's fine. But just make sure you're doing the same thing every single time. And if the finger numbers aren't indicated in your music, you might want to scribble them down just so you are making sure you're accomplishing that repetition. Because say, for example, one day you played C, D, E with finger 1, 2, 3. And then the next day you played C, D, E with finger 2, 3, 4. Once it gets time to, play the song for someone, you're not gonna be able to rely on your muscle memory as much, which is, you don't want to rely exclusively on your muscle memory, but it's important. So training certain fingers to move in a certain way is key if you're trying to speed up a piece, because if you're constantly changing the fingering, you're never going to build that muscle memory, and then you're never going to be able to play it fast and secure. All right, so you know your song really well, you've covered your bases, you've like got a good grasp on everything, and now you want to speed it up. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to look at 3 things that I do to speed up a piece. So we're going to talk about these in more detail in a second, but I just want to outline them here. So number one, pick a slow speed that you can actually play it at, and then gradually, incrementally work up the tempo, maybe like 1 to 5 beats at a time. Number two, remind yourself occasionally of what your goal speed is. So even if you're playing it slow, once in a while, try to play it fast. Remind yourself of what you're working towards. And number three, break up the piece into itty bitty little segments. All right, so number one, start slow and gradually speed up. This is like the most common way to speed up a piece. Like most of us just kind of like understand it. I feel like it's taught really frequently, and it's good. I don't think it's important enough like by itself. I think it needs some other things, but it is a good starting point. So make sure that you can play the page or the piece or whatever you're doing at a set tempo, like a slow tempo, and then just gradually speed it up. Maybe even just like 1 beat per day, like 1 beat per minute per day. And that's great because at the end of the week, you're playing your song like 5 beats or 7 beats faster. And the daily changes you make don't feel like a huge change, like jumping from like 5 to 10 beats in a day, which is like a lot tougher. It kind of just depends on the song and how challenging you find it. You can kind of think of it as weightlifting. For the most part, when you weightlift, you just to clarify, I'm not a weightlifter. I don't weightlift. I know people who do. Just making sure we're on the level here. But you kind of gradually build up the amount of weight that you can handle, right? But you always want to like have enough weight that it's a challenge, that you're not just like, oh, this is easy. See, this is proof that I don't weightlift. This is probably not what it looks like. So number two, like I mentioned, slow practice just doesn't quite do it on its own. What I think is really, really important to do is every now and then, I want you to speed up and try to play it at your goal speed, even if you fall on your face and it sounds horrible. Say you're playing your piece at like say your goal is to play it at like 120 beats per minute. And right now you've been like playing it at like 70 beats per minute for a while and you're kind of stuck there. What I find can happen when you practice slowly for a while is you kind of like train your fingers to play slowly and you kind of lose sight of that goal. It's like, oh yeah, I know this needs to be faster, but your fingers end up being like really complacent. So what you need to do every now and then is give your fingers a little push. If they're playing 70, get them to try to play 120 and see what changes. Maybe it's a huge disaster, but it makes your muscles and your shoulders and your arms move differently. And you need to look at how it changes. So this is something that you could try like every few days. I wouldn't recommend it doing all the time because you want to avoid practicing mistakes, but use it as a reminder of what your goal is. So to use a common analogy, walking and running use different muscles, right? So if you want to run, you don't practice walking. That's not going to get you there. So when you're playing, this is like a mindset thing. This is going to get kind of deep, but I just want to share this with you. It's not enough to practice walking. You need to practice running in slow motion. Think about that for a minute. So number three is working in really tiny segments. So this was the trick that, I guess you could call it a trick. It's more of like a technique. I didn't learn this until I was an adult. And when I did, it kind of like blew my mind. It's one of those things you sort of just have to try. But so sometimes what happens, say I'm learning a line of music. That's not very much. A line of music is usually like 4 to 6 bars. And I'm trying to speed it up. That could take me weeks. It depends on how hard the piece is. But if I'm just like bumping it up little by little, like, 10 beats per minute per week or something, depending on how fast I have to go, that could take forever. So if you do it, instead of doing the whole line, if you just look at one bar, like one tiny little bar, and work on getting that fast, you can get a bar of music up to speed in a day as opposed to a week. So you just work the same way, right? You take that single bar, that little like microcosm of music, and you play it slow until you can do it slow, and then you gradually boost it up, and then play it fast. This should only take like 5 to 10 minutes, by the way, to get like one bar up to speed. So same day you're practicing, try that with another bar. Try that with another bar. Maybe in 20 minutes or so, your brain's a little tired, but you managed to get 4 bars up to speed. Then spend another 10 minutes bridging them all together, because you don't want to be like that person who can play individual chunks really fast, but you have to pause in between. Like, we've all done that, where you like playing a bar, oh, gotta pause, play another bar, gotta pause. So you gotta spend a bit of time bridging them together. And then you'll find, like, in that day, you can play that line of music up to speed. The problem is, the next day, you're all excited, you go back to do it up to speed, but you can't. it's just the way it goes. You got to like kind of retrain your muscles, but it's easier every time. So after 3 or 4 days of kind of like going through the exact same process, you'll find that you can play that line up to speed, and it's only been a few days. So that was the major breakthrough I had that allowed me to speed up my pieces in days instead of weeks. And I really want you to try that one if you try nothing else. Well, try the other stuff too. It's all important. And that's it. Those are my best solutions for being able to speed up a piece. So if you go to pianoTV.net or just look in the description bar below. I've left a link to the blog post, and you can go there and find a PDF, just like a little printable of what we've talked about that you can like print off and put in your practice notebook or practice binder or something, just to make sure you're doing all these things. I think you'll find that helpful anyway. And if you have success speeding up a song, I want you to report back here in the comments and let me know how you did it and what worked and maybe what didn't. And I mean, I always really like reading your comments, but they're great for other people too, because they can see your successes and your strengths and maybe failings and stuff too, and just kind of like it's always good to see those kinds of things. So thank you for watching. You are awesome, and I will catch you next time. Do 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 do.